Hi, and welcome to this Local Government Association webinar on mentally healthier conditions for councillors and communities. This is a two-part webinar. Each one will be about half an hour long, and this is part one of two. And in this session, we'll be looking at mentally healthier conditions for councillors. If you just note the date at the bottom there, we are still in what I consider the third lockdown to do with the pandemic. So some of the references around the pandemic may, I hope, be a bit out of date, but obviously you can adjust to that. And I hope the things that we'll be talking about today are relevant to you, regardless of which sort of council that you're in and which sort of area, but obviously it will differ a little bit if you're in a unitary or a district council or in an urban or rural environment, but hopefully there's something for everyone in this training. The second part is about mentally healthy conditions for communities, but we'll get on to that later. And the kind of concept behind the training is that human beings, us, we evolved as hunter-gatherers over about 2 million years, with all of that entails sort of summed up on the picture on the left, but we now live in a world that's kind of summed up on the picture on the right. A famous parish council meeting you may have seen, where we are in a very kind of different environment from which we evolved. So it's some techniques for managing that disjunction between how we evolved and how we live. So me, I'm Councillor Ed Davey. I am a recovering alcoholic and depressive, but I've benefited from antidepressant medication, cognitive behaviour therapy, Alcoholics Anonymous. And the reason why I mention that is just so that people know that there is support and people should get help if you need it. This training is not about mental illness or these kinds of conditions, but it's worth making that point that there shouldn't be a stigma about it, and you can recover and get better, but do get support if you need it. I've been a Lambeth councillor since about 2010, well, exactly 2010. I swapped Alcoholic Anonymous meetings for council ones. I was an LGIU award-winning scrutiny chair for 7 years. I like to say I'm the reigning champion because they scrapped the award after I got it, so no one else can win it after me. I've been a cabinet member for 3 years. I've worked for health charities, including the British Medical Association and the Mental Health Foundation, for over a decade. And last year I graduated from King's with a Public Health Masters, and I've also studied social determinants of health with Professor Sir Michael Marmot at UCL. And the things that I'm presenting in this webinar and the second part are kind of based on research, not my political views. So as I say, this is part one of a two-part webinar. And in this session, we will cover the context of mental health for councillors. We'll look at evolutionary and physiological, so that's how our bodies work, obviously, approaches to creating the kind of optimal conditions for our own mental health. We'll also look at social media and real-world relationship management. But as I say, we won't really be talking about mental health conditions or illnesses, although most advice in this webinar, like exercising regularly, for example, applies whether you enjoy good mental health or have a diagnosis of most kinds. And so therefore it should be relevant to everyone, although obviously if you have a diagnosis, there may be other things that you need to do as directed by your doctor. And as I say, in part two, we'll be looking at using local government tools and some of the things we've learned in part one to improve community mental health using the principles we're looking at today. So during this session, please try to write down at least 3 things you're going to try and improve on and be as specific as you can. We know from the research literature that when people make specific plans, they're more likely to stick to them. And I want this to be really useful and create action rather than just be a passive experience. So one example could be you could invent a commute if you're currently working at home or that's your normal practice and you don't actually commute. You could invent one by going to the local coffee shop, for example, and maybe going to the park after you finish work in the evening to get some activity into your day. You could make a commitment to turn off all your electronic devices at, say, 7 p.m. And you could make a plan to call your mother or your best friend or both or somebody else at specific times to stay in touch with people. Try to diarise whatever actions that you choose. It's useful to record completion, tick off a list. That's good for our mental health as well. Get a little dopamine hit when you tick off something from your to-do list, and try and complete any task at least 15 times. The literature seems to suggest that this helps us to create new neural pathways, sort of like a sheep track in your brain that makes it more likely that you'll keep up a good habit. So a bit more context. The World Health Organization says there are 3 main factors behind health and illness, including mental health, and they're social determinants. So that's things like poverty and discrimination. Secondly, environment, like access to housing and green space. And thirdly, individual factors like genetics, behaviors, and psychology. And in this part of the training, we'll be looking mostly at the third one, around individual factors. But in the second part, the community part, we'll be looking more at social determinants and environment. So as I'm sure you're more than aware, being a counsellor can be stressful at the best of times. You've got to balance work, family and council commitments. You may have demanding constituents. Humans aren't great with uncertainty, and yet as politicians, we have the uncertainty of elections and other situations. For the last 11 years, we've had to manage quite severe cuts. We have to manage our political relationships. We may have traumatic casework, and these have not been the best of times because of the pandemic. We've had increased isolation, often back-to-back online meetings. Some of us have had homeschooling and other pressures, and some of us have been bereaved or had illness in our families and communities. So it's been a really challenging period to be a counsellor, but it is at the best of times. So I'm really interested in happiness. As I sort of mentioned at the beginning, it sounds like well, I had a period of unhappiness, so I'm really interested in how to be happier. So I've read all these books on happiness science. So you don't have to, because I'm going to summarize some of what I've learned, but you should, because reading and learning is really good for our mental health, reduces stress and depression, it strengthens brain function, and boosts empathy. It's unclear if council papers count. I'm not sure they reduce stress and depression, but anyway, they're something we have to do as part of the job, as you know. So to take an evolutionary approach, as I mentioned at the beginning, human beings have evolved over about 2 million years, and mostly as hunter-gatherers. And this green line is about food production, but it could apply to a lot of different things. And you can see how long the green line is before you get to the development of agriculture, say 9,000 years ago, when people stopped living in hunter-gatherer bands so much and started settling. And then later on, you got industrialization. And then much more recently, you've had the kind of information technology age, which has changed how we live even more dramatically. And that's had a lot of impacts on human beings, obviously. And for a lot of our history, as I say, we've lived in small hunter-gatherer bands with 100 or so individuals with no state structures, including local government didn't exist for most of the period we've evolved. So there wasn't any single kind of individual or elite that could exercise permanent control over human beings, which has changed the way that we live really dramatically in the sense of control. And having control over your own life is a really important determinant of good mental health. So our physiological processes, that's how our bodies work, and our psychological processes, that's how we think, they evolved to be free or more or less free from external control, to be physically active, hunting and gathering a lot of the time, rewarded with dopamine, that's a hormone that makes you feel good, for eating sugar and fat, because as you know, as you can imagine, when you were evolving as a hunter-gatherer, to find some honey or berries or a source of fat was a really good thing, because it's difficult to always sustain food. We were stimulated with flight or fight hormones when at risk, and we were always in close proximity to it. Contrast to that, we've created an environment for ourselves that controls a lot of our time and activity. It minimizes physical activity. It surrounds us with fatty and sugary food, triggers flight or fight hormones through kind of stressful situations, and physically distances from us from others and the natural world, and particularly kind of in lockdown situations as we've had recently, those are all heightened even more than in normal times. So given that disjunction between the conditions in which we evolved to operate optimally and how we live in the modern world often, it's kind of little wonder that we have a mental health crisis that costs thousands of lives just in this country alone. And it's estimated to be approximately £105 billion a year in England alone in lost productivity, service costs, and human misery. Accompanying that, we also have a kind of inactivity and obesity crisis, and about 2/3 of UK adults and 1/3 of children are overweight or obese, and an alcohol crisis with about 1 in 4 adults drinking harmfully. And these all connect with each other and influence each other. And we also have an environmental crisis with air pollution killing about 60,000 people in the UK a year. We have climate change, we have habitat loss, and all of this contributes to an environment that isn't conducive to healthy lives for humans or other life. So my contention, and those of more eminent people than myself, is to try to sort of replicate the conditions in which we evolved as much as we can in our daily lives. So exercise, as I said, hunter-gatherers spent a lot of time running and walking to find water and food and shelter and all the rest of it. So and exercise is absolutely amazing. I'm reading a book at the moment called The Miracle Pill that suggests, you know, that exercise is so beneficial. If you could put it in a pill, it would be the most successful medicine ever. And that's because it releases positive hormones like endorphins and serotonin, which we'll learn a bit more about later. It gets you out of the house, reducing feelings of isolation and loneliness. It's shown to reduce stress, depression and anxiety, and it improves sleep. I don't talk much about sleep in this, but it's obviously really important. And there's a link to the Sleep Foundation with some tips on how to improve sleep if that's an issue for you. And ideally, you exercise in green space, because studies show that green spaces can have a really protective effect on our mental well-being, and we're quicker to recover from stress and less likely to experience depression. But I know that exercise in the kind of formal sense of running in the forest or going to the gym or doing sports isn't for everybody for a whole variety of reasons. And although those things are great and really fab if you can do them, what's more realistic for most people is just to build physical motion more into everyday life. So as mentioned earlier on, you can invent a commute by walking around the block, go to the coffee shop, go to a park before you settle down to work, whether that's in an office or at home for a lot of us over the last year. Buy or improvise a standing desk. This one on the left is very similar to one my sister-in-law created for herself out of an ironing board, but you can buy fancier ones. But just standing rather than sitting can increase our activity levels to a better rate. Try to schedule in 10-minute breaks when you're having electronic meetings on Zoom or Teams or whatever. Often these are a whole hour long or 20 or 30 minutes long, and then they go back to back into another one. If you try to make them 50 minutes or 25 minutes, you can factor in small breaks to get up and move around. I've been having a few walking meetings recently during lockdown with one other person. So, you know, you're allowed to exercise with one other person, just walking around the park, or in my case, the local cemetery is the nearest green space. And I found that a really great way to connect with other people and get some exercise in. If you drink lots of water, hydration is important for health. And also you have to stand up and walk to get the water and to get rid of the water, if you see what I mean. So that naturally builds in some movement. And local shopping on foot or bike, doing little shops rather than one big car shop is good for the local economy and also good for your activity levels. I found cycling around my ward a really good way to sort of stay in touch with what's going on in the ward in a safe, socially distanced way and get some exercise. Gardening and housework count as exercise and movement, obviously. Take the stairs rather than lifts or escalators in public buildings when you go into them. And if you do get on the bus or use public transport, try and get off maybe 1 or 2 stops early and have a little walk. And there are apps that you can get on your phone, like Couch to 5K. I know quite a few people have used that really successfully, that gradually build up levels of exercise and keep you motivated. And the literature, the research shows that self-monitoring is really helpful to develop good habits. So step counters in your phone, or you can buy watches or wristbands or whatever that count your steps and your heart rate and things like that, can help you to have a new regime. So the second part is living in the forest. Obviously not literally, for most of us is not possible, but green space, getting in the garden, going to parks, going to the countryside as much as possible. Even house plants count. And the Royal Horticultural Society has brought the evidence together about houseplants. They improve mood, reduce stress levels, increase productivity, reduce blood pressure, reduce fatigue, even decrease pain. They've done studies with hospital patients recovering from operations, and the ones surrounded by plants, believe it or not, report less pain than those without plants. So houseplants are really great. They also change a lot, and human beings like novelty and change, and plants obviously flower and bits grow and you nurture them. It's all good. Connecting with your tribes like our ancestors. So, you know, try and keep in contact with loved ones at time of stress. We work better in company and with support, and try to keep in touch with your family and friends. Those in the jargon are called strong ties, family and friend, but weak ties are also important. And weak ties are kind of people in our communities, maybe our neighbors or people who work in our local shops, or, you know, people, other parents at the school that our children go to, for example. So talking to them and interacting with them is really important for a sense of community and for our own well-being. And that's been really tricky over the last year for obvious reasons, but it's something we need to try to do. And living in the moment. So obviously our ancestors didn't probably have, you know, 5-year career plans and things like that. They just lived in the moment much more. This can sometimes be called mindfulness. So that's where you try not to worry about all the things that you're worrying about and be present in the moment. I pick up this stone that I've pictured that I got on a beach in Sardinia, and I feel its weight and the temperature. It's usually colder than the rest of the room, the texture of it, and that kind of helps sort of ground me in the moment rather than worrying about stuff. And mindfulness, as it's called, and you can read more about mindfulness, reduces depression, or can do, anxiety and stress. And the other thing about my rock is that it reminds me of a great experience, a holiday on a nice beach. And the literature says that if you have spare money, you should spend it on experiences, not possessions. Experiences are the things that are more likely to make us much happier than possessions. So that was the evolutionary approach, and connected to that is the physiological approach, which simply means how our bodies work and how we look after and regulate our bodies through chemical messages known as hormones that move around our endocrine system, which sounds all very technical, but we don't have to worry about that. It's actually quite straightforward and simple. Don't worry, you don't have to learn that diagram on the left. So here are a few positive hormones that we can stimulate naturally. So oxytocin is a kind of bonding hormone that's produced when we feel safe, connected and close to people or even animals. That's why we have pets, or some of us have pets. We get a nice feeling from the oxytocin. So we can stimulate this naturally by hugging, holding hands with loved ones, being affectionate with friends or family, giving compliments to each other, preparing and sharing food with loved ones, listening to music, singing and dancing together, petting pets, all good for oxytocin. Second one, serotonin, you may have heard of as a happiness hormone. So a lot of antidepressant medication works by enabling our brains to take in more serotonin, and this has been shown to be beneficial for depression and making us happier. And we don't necessarily need antidepressants to stimulate this, although some people do need it. And as I say, I've benefited from it myself, and there's no shame in it. But we also get it from sunshine, which is also good for vitamin D, which helps keep us well. Aerobic exercise, and aerobic exercise obviously means exercise that raises your heart rate. So walking fast or running or cycling reasonably fast releases something called tryptophan, which I have learnt is an amino acid which your body can then convert into serotonin. And this is particularly happens creating tryptophan, that is, when we exercise in green space. We can also get tryptophan from certain sorts of foods, especially proteins like oily fish or poultry or cheese or eggs. And I was reading that our bodies are more efficient at using the tryptophan to turn it into serotonin if you have it with carbohydrates, so potatoes, rice, pasta, bread, which is a fairly simple way of getting happiness. Meditation, this is one I have never managed to do, but some people say that it's amazing, so that could be something that you could try, and there are various tips on the internet and in books. Dopamine is a reward chemical, and it's triggered by things like praise, positive outcomes, winning, and eating nice food. So you can get it from eating your favorite treat, obviously in responsible and balanced quantities. Celebrating the little wins in daily life, engaging in self-care, having a nice shower, having nice beauty products, things like that. Listening to feel-good music, finishing a task or project you started. Lists are really good. I'm a big fan of having a list of tasks to do and then ticking it off, and that gives you a little dopamine hit when you've finished one. Endorphin is a natural painkiller. Get it from exercising. Exercise comes up a lot, as you may have noticed. Laughing, especially with others, so comedy is a fantastic natural medicine. Eating dark chocolate and spicy food, so this is a nice indulgent one, obviously eat responsibly, but dark chocolate in particular is found to release endorphin, and spicy food. Being artistic. Sex, so this is a great page, much more fun than some other pages that you may have seen. Sex, dark chocolate, curry, all good for you, endorphin. So now we're going to move on to a bit about some specific advice around managing social media. To carry on my evolutionary theme, obviously our hunter-gatherers ancestors didn't have social media. The nearest I could find was this picture of Native Americans making smoke signals. And it was one of the other things of the modern world that our ancestors didn't have to contend with. But we do have to, or rather, we don't have to. You don't have to be on social media. My wife refuses to use it, probably wisely. It's not compulsory, but if you do, there are some ways of managing it. So first of all, I think it's useful to think about why it is that you might be using social media. And I always like this 3-word formulation: objective, strategy, tactics. So I used to work in public affairs, lobbying for health charities, and people often want to do activity, meet MPs and write to people and get messages in the press. But I'd always say, well, what is your objective first? Let's find out, let's think about what it is we're trying to achieve before we decide to use these tools, including social media. So what is your objective? Give it a little bit of thought. It might be, I expect we all have this in common, to be an effective ward councillor, to help vulnerable people across your borough, maybe to gain promotion and influence in your council or borough. Maybe you want to become an MP. Maybe all of these. And thinking about that should steer what social media you use and how you use it. So to be an effective ward councillor, the most effective social media you can use that the literature shows us is the best way to win votes and engage your residents and deliver for them is door knocking. So obviously that's been tricky over the last year, but when it's allowed, knocking on people's doors and actually talking to them in the real world is the best way to engage with people. Similarly, real world community events and meetings, when they are allowed to happen, are a great way of talking to people, listening to their views, responding to them, winning their support. Leafleting, old-fashioned leafleting, not terribly environmentally friendly, but found to be the third most effective way of connecting with residents and constituents and the electorate. There are social media platforms like Nextdoor that can be quite good for engaging local people. Some local areas have Facebook groups you may want to connect with, and some have WhatsApp groups as well. If you're interested in the wider world, you want a slightly higher profile, you want to follow other people and have them follow you, Twitter is an amazing place for that, a social media platform, not without its perils, but you know, you get some really interesting stories and connections through Twitter if managed well. And I don't use any of these, but my children do. So for younger people and to connect with them, they use Instagram, they use TikTok. I have appeared in some of my daughter's TikTok videos inadvertently, or she gets me to dance or some stupidness. But there's also Snapchat, and they seem to watch a lot of YouTube. So here's some sort of electronic hygiene tips. First of all, it's important to know that tech firms behind these social media platforms, they spend huge sums of money understanding and manipulating the sorts of behavioral processes we've been discussing. So they know about all the hormones we've talked about, and they drip feed us dopamine hits in particular. So if you watch my son play Fortnite, whenever he gets a kill, this is a game where you shoot people, you know, he gets a little buzz out of it. He gets a little dopamine hit. It keeps him coming back for more and keep playing the game and spending money on V-Bucks. And then, or me on Twitter, getting likes and retweets for things. It drip feeds me dopamine, keeps you coming back. So you should be aware that you are being manipulated. And somebody said, you know, when a product is free, like a lot of these games or social media platforms are, you are the product. So they are selling advertising space. They are trying to get you to buy stuff. There's no such thing as a free lunch, especially on the internet. There's also algorithms. So the way these systems are set up is that they understand and they can analyze the things that you like and look at, and then they'll send you more messages that are similar. And it can actually be a kind of radicalizing process, because you might start looking at something like, I don't know, stories about immigrants coming into the country, and then it'll send you more and more kind of extreme messages potentially around immigration, or Islam, or the environment. Could be anything. It's just something to be aware of that can happen to you or those around you. You can turn off notifications. So if your phone is pinging all the time and telling you stuff, you know, you can turn things off. You can set do not disturb modes after certain hours. And you can change Twitter settings. Going back to the algorithm point, you can actually change the Twitter settings so that you just get the newest messages rather than necessarily the most inflammatory stuff. You can't do that on Facebook, unfortunately, but you can do it on Twitter to sort of subvert the algorithm. You can also set privacy limits on Facebook and other platforms so that you can limit who can see or interact with you on social media. Here are some more tips. I don't always manage these myself, but I try to so hard. I try not to get into rows or respond to criticism on Twitter. I used to lose entire weekends having rows with people. I'm not sure it won me a single vote or did me any good. It certainly made me not popular with my family because I wouldn't be present, and it was a great source of anxiety to me. Oh, what are they going to say now? So I do my best to ignore that. It doesn't do any good. And usually the people having a go at you or sniping have very few followers. Sometimes they're even robots, and you're just drawing attention to them if you interact with them because you've probably got more followers than them. Try to spread useful, positive messages about what you or your council or whatever is doing, rather than attacking others. Obviously, there is a place in politics for attacking the policies of your opponents or bad things that are happening in the world. But generally speaking, try to be positive is more useful, I think, and better for our mental health. Feel free to, most platforms have a mute or a block function where people who are annoying you or being offensive or threatening you or being rude in any way can be muted or blocked. It's your channel. You don't have to be available to trolls. You wouldn't put up with it in the pub. You'd move away or walk away or go somewhere else. And there's no reason why you should. This is a public space, even if it's online. And I mute and block lots of people, and that's fine. So just moving on to relationships with colleagues and constituents. We started with a picture of Handforth Parish Council and their quite a difficult and famous now Zoom meeting. And Jackie Weaver's become quite a cult figure in local government. Who'd have thought it? And if you saw that footage, you'd have seen her being really firm and professional, but also really polite. So I try to be like Jackie Weaver if I can in difficult situations. Similarly, I try to be more like Kamala Harris, who I think is firm but professional and polite, and less so the previous incumbent of the White House, who I don't think is a great role model for how politicians should act. You may have a different opinion, which is fine. I was a very angry backbencher, I think, in my first term in particular. And one of my fellow councillors has been a councillor for a long time, and he always deals with things really calmly. So I still say to myself, if I get wound up, you know, how would Councillor Jim Dixon deal with this situation? And I try to act in that way. So maybe there's someone in your council, if you're a bit prone to getting wound up, that you admire for being calmer, and try to think of how they would act in a situation if that's an issue for you, like it was for me. And I try, or it can be useful to treat everyone like you might need their vote one day. You may have different system in your council, but if you treat everyone like you need their vote, you're probably going to treat them with respect and kindness, I should think. But it doesn't mean you have to put up with nonsense or unreasonable, unfair, or abusive conduct. You can tell them firmly that their conduct is unreasonable, and if it's abusive in any way, you know, do involve others. Could be your whips, could be your democratic services. There are mechanisms to deal with it, and there's no reason why you should put up with discriminatory, bullying behavior. That's really bad for your mental health, and it shouldn't be tolerated. So to sum up, if you feel unwell, depressed, problem drinking, anxiety, something that's you think's beyond your own ability to deal with, do seek help and support. There is help there. Your GP is often a good place to start with that. If you do nothing else from this training, please do build more exercise into your day. And like I say, when I say exercise, I don't necessarily mean going to the gym. I just mean any more movement in your day is a good thing. Try to eat, drink, and sleep sensibly. Try to take control of social media and work patterns rather than it control you. Be present in the moment, especially with your close ties, your family and your friends, and stay in touch with them. And be kind to yourself and those around you. Kindness is really important. So this is my ideal mentally healthy day. You could do a version of this if you want. Obviously, this is not going to be relevant to everyone. I just thought it'd give you an idea of how you might apply some of the principles that we've learned about in an actual day. So I wake up more or less the same time every day. It's good to have a regular go to bed and wake up time. Have a cuddle if there's anyone to cuddle in your bed. That's really good to remember. It triggers useful hormones. Then it's healthy breakfast time with the children, with the radio on, having a bit of a sing and dance and listening to music. I walk my son to school hand in hand. This is my 8-year-old son, not my 21-year-old son, to school, talking to him and saying hello to other families. So strong and weak ties. Then back to work at home, ticking off a list, getting dopamine hits of useful tasks with lots of water and breaks in the garden. Tryptophan sandwich sounds delicious, like chicken or cheese sandwich. Talking to my wife, put the screens away for a bit. Usually call my mother at some point during the day. Then some more work with breaks. I try and get in at least one, formal bit of exercise, go for a cycle and then a run around the field and say hello to fellow joggers. Have a shower with nice soap, bit of self-care there. Dark chocolate bar, bit more work, spend time with family, curry, sharing problems and support, being present with each other. End screen time at 8 o'clock, talk about today's wins, what we're grateful for, holiday plans, reading and cuddles at 10 o'clock, and then sleep at 11 to get 8 hours in. Like I say, your day may be very different from that. It's just an example, or arguments, I hope. Here's a bit more further reading. There's a brilliant series. The one on the left is overcoming. This one is anger and irritability, but there's overcoming depression, overcoming anxiety, overcoming problem drinking, a whole series that's based on cognitive behavior therapy techniques, which are very evidence-based and useful. So have a look at that if that's an issue for you. Happiness by Design by Paul Dolan is a really good one about building kind of happiness practice into your life. As is Happier by Tal Ben-Shahar, who ran a happiness course at Harvard University that became the most popular course the university ever run, and some other interesting books about psychology, if you like that kind of thing, and some more. And I mentioned The Miracle Pill, which is a new one about exercise, which I find fascinating. So there is a second part to this training. I hope this has been useful for you, and I do hope you engage in the second part, which is about how to use local government powers and influence to create mentally healthier conditions for residents in your area. It's based on this workbook that you may wish to have a look at as well. And we can also do this training. The LGA and myself can arrange for this training to be done in a bespoke way, in an interactive way for your specific council, where we bring together some of the specific issues in your area and some of the data. Very happy to do that, so do get in touch. You can contact me via Twitter, or that's my email. And please just take 2 minutes to complete this survey to give me a bit of feedback that will help improve the training. And thank you very much for listening. Hope you have a great day. I hope you've written down 3 specific actions you're going to take. And thank you.